The big question today is, why even study history? Well, we study history to understand how the world that we live in today came to be. To learn of all those before us that made a difference in the world and how they did it. We study history to learn from not only the achievements and great success stories, but also of the failures and mistakes of all that happened before. We study it to have an understanding of the foundations of anything and everything, which can be quite a lot. The history we are simply skimming over today is the history of multimedia, from the invention of the Gutenberg press to World War II propaganda films. This timeline will show key events that went into the art and means of communication that molded over years and years. We will also touch on how some of these events, inventions, and people played a role in affecting each other. However, before we dive into this timeline, some may be asking themselves, what is multimedia? While the definitions range of so many different opinions, some of the basic explanations say that multimedia is the use of more than one type of communication. Others argue that it must involve computer technology or that it must be interactive. Whatever your definition of multimedia might be, this timeline is going to touch on multimedia is some form. With every new form of media that has been introduced into the world actually had its beginnings long before the concepts even existed. In the 1400s there were priests who copied the Bible by hand in the very few typefaces that existed and then had the church translate to the common people. It was not until 1454 that the Gutenberg Revolution began, when Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press, which made millions of books about science, literature, religion, and more be created and shared. People like Aldous Manchus started to publish so many books that they created their own presses focused on topics like religion and geography. It was the emergence of individualism, objectivity, abstract thinking, and creative thought that helped lead to the foundations of the Renaissance. A rebirth period started in Europe with art, politics, exploration, and more. Real problems started between the church and in 1517, when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses about reforming from the church having too much power. Thanks to the Gutenberg press, Martin Luther was able to easily spread his ideas and led others to see the Bible in their own vernacular, causing their own opinions to form, although the church and king fought back with censorship. Having the Bible in their own vernacular helped countries to start having books in their own language and allowed even unskillful people to learn to read. Once reading became more common, newspapers were established, like the first newspaper in Germany, 1631. Some King James Bibles were published that had an error leaving out the "not" in "thou shalt not commit adultery," which led to them being destroyed by order of the King of England. After printing was more established, the ways people were able to share their thoughts and other forms of media were being explored. Inventors like Ludwig von Siegen started to create things like mezzotints, which become a way to reproduce halftones off of a copper plate and little dots. Meanwhile, after exploration in America was growing, Roger Williams shared his discoveries of Native American culture with the rest of the world. The active readers of newspapers lead to newspapers, advertisements, and magazines. The first coffee ad even made claims of how coffee could help with headaches and coughs. In 1663, the German Literature and Philosophy magazine established that there was a market for target audiences. The U.S. joined the craze of marketing when the first newspaper ad for Oyster Bay real estate came out in 1704. The spread of opinions, discoveries, and marketing, as well as historical events, helped lead to the Industrial Revolution. Mass production of most things and items became more prominent, especially in places like America. By 1775, the American Revolution started when the colonies wanted freedom from English rule after individuals like that of Thomas Paine pushed their publications as propaganda against England. War times created the need for information to be spread faster, which is why the U.S. Post was invented, and inventors tried to create new ways of communication. While many failed, it was their collective work that helped lead to inventions such as the electric telegraph in 1837. Not only did people need means communicate news fast, but people wanted to see what was happening in the world as well. In 1839, after years of studying and experiments, Louis-Jacques Daguerre created the first successful photographic process. It was not until the Crimean War between Russia and the Ottoman Empire that war photography really broke out. Individuals like Roger Fenton took the advancements of photography since Daguerre and used photos of the camps and soldiers in the Crimean War to share with civilians what the war consisted of. Meanwhile, in America, Cyrus Field was working on the ways the communication between countries could become better with the transatlantic cable. It was not until 1866, after many failed attempts, that the transatlantic cable was a success, making communication between countries faster forever. When politics and war were growing in America, photographers like Matthew Brady started to document important figures and war, which promoted these elements in ways people had not expected. His work of Lincoln helped sway votes in the 1860 election, and by 1861 his violent and shocking photos of war advertised everything war consisted of. Others, like the Bergstresser brothers, capitalized on the media by setting up photography studios in war times and selling photographs of soldiers before they went off to war. It was the wars of the time that caused a push for better and faster communication than even that of the telegraph. By 1874, the first successful typewriter was on the market, and by 1876, Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone, capitalizing on faster communication for all. It was inventions like the telephone and basic radio communication invented by Marconi that changed the way people shared news and opinions. Even culture was explored more in depth through the art of photography done by Edward S. Curtis, who spent years of his life dedicated to Native American culture. Taking photos was only an art to few who could afford it until 1900, when the Kodak camera company came out with the Brownie camera, which made taking photos accessible to anyone who had $1. Their slogan, "You push the button, we do the rest," captured how they marketed how a form of media that was once impossible and then expensive, became an art form anyone could be a part of. Ideas like that only spread more often and faster, with the Trans-Pacific Cable being laid in 1903, connecting more countries, and by 1906 radio communication became public use, which opened the doors to sharing news and opinions in a new fashion. Along with radio communication, different art movements started to appear as many people wanted to voice their opinions about war, politics, and other current events through multiple forms of media. The Dada movement of the 1960s was an example of this, when artists' pieces expressed nonsense and incongruity after World War I. Marcel Duchamp's piece in 1917 titled "The Fountain" was an upside-down urinal which called people ask, "What is art?" Man Ray used influences from the Dada movement, along with Cubism, Futurism, and Surrealism, to create many of his own painting and film pieces. Speaking of film, in Germany in the 1930s, Leni Riefenstahl was a director of Nazi propaganda films, which led many to automatically assume she was a Nazi supporter because of her art. The distraught of the Great Depression was also seen during this time through the photography of those like Dorothea Lange, who explored a new and large culture of those struck by poverty. By 1941, America was attacked when Pearl Harbor was bombed. This resulted in a 7-series propaganda film that was commissioned by the U.S. titled "Why We Fight." Mass publication led to the masses reading on their own, better communication, advertising, and the overall ideas of individualism, objectivity, abstract thinking, and creative thought.